Prospect City, New Mexico Territory. Late summer of 1883. Molly Walsh crouched behind the water trough outside the Silver Bell Saloon and watched the banker's men nail a foreclosure notice to the assayer's office door. She counted 3 armed guards and a clerk with a leather satchel full of papers that looked too crisp and new to be real. The air tasted like smoke and lightning. Horses stamped and pulled at their hitching posts. The railroad had brought money and strangers and trouble, and now someone was using forged loan documents to steal the town piece by piece. Molly had ridden into Prospect City 2 weeks ago with nothing but a circus saddle and a reputation for trick riding that no one here cared about. She needed work and a place to disappear. The mining camp was perfect for that. A boom and bust town full of people with secrets. But now she was tangled in someone else's war. The storm rolled closer. Dry lightning split the sky over the canyon ridge, and thunder shook the dirt. She pulled her burgundy riding jacket tighter and moved along the alley toward the livery stable. That was when she saw the man stumble out of the back door of the gunsmith's shop. He wore a torn Union cavalry coat and held his left shoulder with a blood-soaked hand. His face was pale, and his sharp blue eyes scanned the alley like he expected someone to shoot him. Molly made a choice. She crossed the alley in 3 strides and caught him by the elbow before he hit the ground.
Lean on me. Don't fight it.
He looked at her with suspicion and pain.
Who are you?
Someone who doesn't like the look of that wound. You need shelter before this storm hits.
He nodded once and let her guide him toward the edge of town. She had been staying in an old trapper's cabin half a mile out, a sagging structure with a leaky roof and a door that barely latched. But it was better than bleeding out in the dirt. The wind picked up, and dust devils spun across the road. She felt the first cold drop of rain hit her cheek as they stumbled through the cabin door. Inside, Molly kicked the door shut and half dragged him to the narrow cot against the wall. Rain hammered the roof. She lit the oil lamp with shaking hands and turned to look at him properly. He was maybe 32 or 33. With the kind of face that had seen too many battles and not enough rest. His cavalry coat was genuine, faded and torn at the seams, and the blood spreading across his shoulder looked fresh.
Let me see it.
He tried to sit up straighter.
I can manage.
You are bleeding through your shirt. Let me see it, or pass out. Your choice.
He exhaled and let her peel the coat away. The wound was a deep gash along his shoulder. Not a bullet hole, but something sharp, like a knife or broken glass. She fetched water from the basin and tore a strip from an old blanket. He watched her with those sharp blue eyes and did not flinch when she pressed the wet cloth against the wound.
You have done this before.
I worked with horses. They kick and bite. You learn to stitch, or you lose stock.
She worked in silence for a moment, cleaning the blood away and wrapping the makeshift bandage tight. Outside, the storm roared. Lightning lit the cabin in flashes, and thunder rattled the shutters. When she finished, she sat back on her heels and looked at him.
What happened?
I was asking questions I should not have asked.
About what?
About a man named Basil Lockhart.
Molly froze. She knew that name. Basil Lockhart was the gunsmith. A cold-eyed man with a loud voice and a reputation for selling ammunition that misfired or exploded in the barrel. People said he staged accidents when buyers complained. People also said he had friends in the bank and the sheriff's office. She had seen him watching her in the street 2 days ago, his gaze lingering too long, his smile too wide.
The Gunsmith.
You know him?
Everyone knows him. He sells bad ammo, and people die. No one does anything about it.
I think he is doing more than selling bad ammo. I think he is working with someone to forge loan documents and steal land. I found a pocket watch in the alley behind his shop. It was broken. Stopped at 10 minutes past 8. There was blood on the back.
He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a battered silver pocket watch. The glass was cracked, and the hands were frozen. Molly took it and turned it over. There was a dark stain on the engraved back, brown and flaky.
I heard a man was killed 3 weeks ago. A prospector named Samuel Kern. He was found in the alley behind the bank at dawn. The sheriff said it was a robbery, but no one robbed him. His pockets were full of gold dust. I think someone killed him because he found out about the forged papers. I think the watch belonged to him. I think it stopped when he died.
Why were you asking about Lockhart?
Because I have nowhere else to go. I left the cavalry after a bad fight in Colorado. Lost half my unit to poor leadership and worse orders. I rode south looking for work and ended up here. I heard about the foreclosures and the forged papers, and I thought maybe I could help. I used to be good at finding the truth, but I got careless. Lockhart saw me watching his shop. He sent 2 men after me with knives. I fought them off, but one of them cut me before I could get away.
You are lucky. They did not kill you.
I know.
She handed the watch back and stood up. The storm was getting worse. Rain poured through a crack in the roof and pooled on the floor. She moved to the stove and coaxed the embers into a small fire, then filled a dented kettle with water from the barrel.
You need rest, and you need food. I have beans and a little coffee. After that, we figure out what to do with that watch.
We? She didn't warn or fled her. One's offer said they were plessed down, and they warned the one stas but the Peter and the trams. They were the nuft when the lost lot spoke. But stress. I just bowing frest in the teaching dynatis. Our fire. I called it tire, but my finally was pay for a crisis walking. By Cyverlios.
You think I am going to let you walk out of here and get yourself killed? Lockhart is dangerous. If he knows you have that watch, he will come for you. And if he is working with the bank, he has men and money behind him.
Why do you care?
Because I am tired of watching bad men win.
She said it quietly, but the words hung in the air like smoke. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Outside, the storm screamed. Inside, the cabin felt small and close, and almost safe. Molly poured coffee into 2 tin cups and handed him one. He drank it slowly, his eyes never leaving her face.
What is your name?
Molly Walsh.
Josiah Hawkins.
Former cavalry officer?
Former a lot of things.
She sat down on the floor beside the cot and wrapped her hands around her own cup. The coffee was bitter and strong, and it cut through the cold, settling into her bones.
I was a trick rider with a traveling circus. We went from town to town doing shows. I was good. Really good. But the circus owner got greedy and started taking bets on dangerous stunts. One night he told me to jump a wagon on fire. I refused. He tried to force me. I left that night and never looked back.
How long ago?
3 months. I have been moving ever since. Trying to stay ahead of anyone who might come looking. Trying to find a place where I can start over.
This is not that place.
I know. But it is the place I am in right now. So I might as well do something useful while I am here.
Josiah smiled. Small and tired, but real. She smiled back. The storm raged on. They sat in silence and listened to the rain and the thunder and the wind tearing at the cabin walls. Molly thought about the pocket watch and the dead prospector and the forged loan papers. She thought about Basil Lockhart and his cold eyes and the way he had looked at her in the street. She thought about the town full of people losing their land to a lie. And she thought about the man beside her, wounded and reckless and brave, who had risked his life for the truth. She made another choice.
We take the watch to the sheriff tomorrow. We show him the blood and tell him about the murder. We make him investigate.
The sheriff works for the bank. He will not listen.
Then, we find someone who will. The newspaperman. The circuit judge. Someone.
That could get you killed.
Then I will die fighting. Better than running forever.
Josiah reached out and took her hand. His grip was warm and steady, despite the pain he must have been feeling.
Thank you.
For what?
For not leaving me in the alley.
She squeezed his hand once, then let go. The fire crackled. The storm began to ease. By dawn, the rain had stopped, and the sky was the color of old bruises. Molly woke on the floor beside the cot, with her jacket pulled over her like a blanket. Josiah was still asleep, his breathing slow and even. She stood quietly and stepped outside. The air smelled like wet earth and smoke. The town was waking. She could see riders moving along the main street and hear the clang of the blacksmith's hammer starting up. She thought about the plan. Take the watch to the sheriff. Demand answers. Force the truth into the open. It was a good plan. It was also dangerous. Basil Lockhart would not let them expose him without a fight. She heard movement behind her and turned. Josiah stood in the doorway, pale but upright, his coat draped over his good shoulder.
Ready?
Ready.
They walked into town together. The sun climbed, and the heat came with it. By mid-morning, they were standing outside the sheriff's office. Molly knocked once and pushed the door open. The sheriff was a heavy man with gray whiskers and tired eyes. He looked up from a stack of papers and frowned. The sheriff told them to leave. Told them the prospector's death was closed. Told them the watch proved nothing. Josiah set the watch on the desk anyway.
This watch stopped at 10 minutes past 8. Samuel Kern was found dead at dawn. Someone killed him the night before. Someone who did not want him talking about forged loan documents. Someone who works with the bank and the gunsmith.
The sheriff's face went red. He ordered them out, threatened to lock them up for disturbing the peace. Molly stood her ground.
You are protecting a killer. You are letting him steal this town piece by piece. We have proof.
The sheriff stood, and his hand moved to his gun belt. Before anyone could move, the door swung open, and Basil Lockhart walked in. He was tall and broad with pale eyes and a mouth that smiled too easily. He looked at Molly first, then at Josiah, then at the watch on the desk. His smile widened. Lockhart said the watch was his. Said Josiah stole it from his shop. Said he wanted it back, and he wanted the thief arrested. The sheriff nodded and reached for the watch. Josiah moved faster. He grabbed the watch and shoved it into his coat pocket, then pulled Molly toward the door.
Run.
They ran. Down the main street, past the saloon and the general store and the assayer's office with its foreclosure notice still nailed to the door. Gunshots cracked behind them. Molly ducked and kept running. Josiah stumbled and caught himself. They turned into an alley and pressed against the wall, breathing hard. Footsteps pounded closer. Molly looked around and saw a ladder leading to a low rooftop. She grabbed Josiah's good arm and pointed. They climbed fast, splinters digging into their palms, and pulled themselves onto the hot tin roof just as the sheriff and 2 deputies rounded the corner below. They lay flat and still. The men searched the alley, cursed, and moved on. Molly waited until the footsteps faded, then sat up. Josiah was beside her, his face gray with pain, his bandage stained red again.
Your shoulder is bleeding.
I know.
We need to get out of town. They will search every building.
We need to finish this. If we run now, Lockhart wins. The town loses everything.
If we stay, we die.
Not if we find proof. Real proof. Something the whole town can see.
Molly thought fast. The bank. The forged loan documents. If they could get inside and find the papers, they could expose the whole scheme. But the bank was guarded, and Lockhart would be watching.
The bank closes at noon. If we wait until then, there will be fewer people inside.
And more risk.
Everything is risk now.
They stayed on the roof until the sun was high, and the streets began to empty for the midday meal. Then they climbed down and moved through the alleys toward the back of the bank. The building was 2 stories, brick and timber, with barred windows and a heavy door. Molly tested the back door. Locked. Josiah pulled a thin piece of wire from his coat and knelt beside the lock. His hands shook, but he worked the wire carefully until the lock clicked. The door swung open. Inside, the bank was dim and cool. A narrow hallway led to the main room with its teller cages and vault. Molly heard voices from the front. She motioned for Josiah to follow and slipped into a side office. The room was small and cluttered with ledgers and stacks of paper. She pulled open a desk drawer and found a sheaf of loan documents tied with string. She scanned them quickly. The signatures were shaky and uneven. The dates did not match. The amounts were wrong. Forged. Every one of them.
These are the forgeries. This is the proof.
Take them. We need to get out before someone comes.
Molly shoved the papers into her jacket and turned toward the door. That was when she heard the footsteps. Heavy boots on the wooden floor. Coming closer. Josiah grabbed her and pulled her behind the desk. The door swung open. Basil Lockhart stepped inside. He was not smiling now. He had a revolver in his hand, and his pale eyes were cold. Lockhart said he knew they would come. Said he had been waiting. Said Molly was going to regret running from him. He raised the gun. Josiah moved. He lunged from behind the desk and hit Lockhart hard, driving him back into the hallway. The gun went off. The bullet smashed into the ceiling. Plaster rained down. Molly scrambled to her feet and saw the 2 men struggling. Josiah was wounded and weaker, but he fought with everything he had. Lockhart was bigger and meaner. He slammed Josiah against the wall and raised the gun again. Molly did not think. She grabbed a heavy ledger from the desk and swung it as hard as she could. The book hit Lockhart in the side of the head. He staggered. Josiah grabbed the gun and twisted it out of his grip. The weapon clattered to the floor. Lockhart lunged for it. Molly kicked it away. It skidded across the floor and stopped near the vault. Lockhart roared and came at her. She ducked, and he crashed into the desk. Josiah grabbed him by the collar and slammed him face first into the wall. Lockhart went limp. Footsteps thundered from the main room. Voices shouted. The sheriff burst through the door with his deputies. He saw Lockhart slumped against the wall and the gun on the floor, and the papers spilling from Molly's jacket. His face went pale.
These are forged loan documents. Lockhart and the bank have been stealing land from half the town. And this watch belongs to Samuel Kern. It stopped when he was killed. Lockhart killed him to keep him quiet.
The sheriff looked at Lockhart, then at the papers, then at the watch Josiah pulled from his pocket. He did not say anything for a long moment. Then he nodded. The sheriff ordered his deputies to take Lockhart into custody, told them to lock him up and send for the circuit judge, told them to gather every loan document in the bank and bring them to his office. He looked at Molly and Josiah. The sheriff said they had stirred up a hornet's nest, said the town would be in chaos for weeks. But he also said they had done the right thing. Molly did not answer. She was too tired and too shaken. Josiah leaned against the wall and closed his eyes. His bandage was soaked through, and his face was gray. Molly took his arm.
We need to get you back to the cabin. You need rest.
I need a drink.
After I patch you up again. Come on.
They walked out of the bank into the blinding midday sun. The street was full of people now, drawn by the gunshots and the shouting. Molly saw faces she recognized. The blacksmith, the clerk from the general store, the widow who ran the boarding house. They were staring, whispering, pointing. She ignored them and kept walking. Josiah stumbled once, and she caught him. They made it back to the cabin as the sun began to sink toward the canyon ridge. Inside, she helped him onto the cot and unwrapped the ruined bandage. The wound was bleeding again, but it looked clean. She fetched water and tore fresh strips from the blanket and worked in silence. When she finished, she sat down on the floor beside him.
You almost got yourself killed.
So did you.
I hit him with a book. You tackled a man with a gun.
I had help.
She smiled despite herself. He smiled back. The cabin was quiet. The storm was gone, and the air was soft and cool. Outside, the sky turned orange and gold. Molly thought about the town and the forged papers and the dead prospector. She thought about Basil Lockhart locked in a cell waiting for the judge. She thought about the people who would get their land back and the people who would finally see justice. And she thought about the man beside her, wounded and reckless and brave, who had risked everything for the truth.
What will you do now?
I do not know. Stay here for a while. See what happens. Maybe find work.
The town could use a good writer. The mail contract is up for renewal.
Are you trying to get me to stay?
Maybe.
She looked at him and saw something in his eyes that made her heart beat faster. Something warm and real and hopeful.
What about you? Where will you go?
Nowhere. I am done running.
You have nowhere safe to heal.
I have here.
He said it quietly, but the words hit her like a fist. She stared at him. He held her gaze.
I have here, if you will let me stay.
She did not answer. She did not need to. She leaned forward and kissed him. It was soft and careful and full of everything she could not say. He kissed her back, his good hand cupping her face, his touch gentle despite the roughness of his calluses. When they finally pulled apart, she rested her forehead against his.
You can stay.
The next 3 days passed in a blur. Josiah healed slowly. Molly brought food from the general store and coffee from the saloon. She rode into town each morning to hear the news. The circuit judge arrived on the second day and opened an investigation. The bank clerk confessed. The forged papers were burned in the street. Lockhart sat in his cell and said nothing. On the third day, the judge ruled. Lockhart was guilty of fraud and conspiracy. The murder charge would go to trial, but the evidence was clear. The town held a meeting in the saloon and voted to seize the bank's assets and return the land to its rightful owners. Molly stood at the back and watched. She saw relief and anger and hope on every face. When the meeting ended, the blacksmith came up to her and shook her hand. The widow hugged her. The clerk from the general store offered her a drink. She accepted. It tasted like victory. That evening she walked back to the cabin and found Josiah standing outside. His left arm was still in the sling, but he was on his feet. The bruising on his face had faded from purple to yellow. He turned when he heard her boots on the dirt path and smiled.
I was getting restless.
She stopped a few feet away and crossed her arms.
You should be resting.
I've rested enough.
He stepped closer. His eyes searched her face.
What happened in town?
The judge ruled. Lockhart stays in jail. The bank is being dissolved. People are getting their land back.
Josiah let out a long breath.
Good.
They stood in silence for a moment. The sun was low, and the air smelled like dust and sage. Molly looked at the cabin behind him, and then at the horizon.
What will you do now?
He reached out with his good hand and took hers. His grip was warm and steady.
I don't know. I thought I'd leave. Go back east, maybe. But now I'm not so sure.
She felt her heart beat faster.
Why not?
Because of you.
The words hung in the air between them. She looked up into his eyes and saw something she hadn't seen before. Not fear, or pain, or exhaustion, just hope.
Josiah.
I know what you're going to say. You're going to say you don't need anyone. You're going to say you've been fine on your own. But I think maybe we both deserve something better than fine.
She wanted to argue, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she stepped forward and rested her forehead against his chest. He wrapped his good arm around her and held her close.
I'm scared.
Me too.
They stood like that until the sun touched the horizon. Then, Molly pulled back and wiped her eyes.
The cabin lease is up in 2 days.
Then we'll figure it out. Together.
She nodded. The fear was still there, but it felt smaller now. They walked back inside and sat by the fire. Josiah told her about his sister in Kansas City and the letters he'd stopped answering. Molly told him about the circus and the towns she'd passed through and the people she'd left behind. They talked until the fire burned low and the stars came out. Then they slept side by side on the floor, with blankets pulled up to their chins. The next morning, Molly rode into town early. She needed to settle her account at the general store and return the borrowed supplies. When she arrived, the street was busier than usual. People stood in clusters talking and pointing toward the bank. The sign out front had been taken down. A new one was being painted. She tied her horse and walked toward the crowd. The blacksmith saw her and waved. He called out that the town council had voted to open a new lending office run by the merchants themselves. No more crooked bankers. Molly smiled and nodded. She made her way to the general store and paid what she owed. The clerk thanked her and asked if she was staying. She said she didn't know yet. On her way out, she passed the saloon and saw the widow standing on the porch. The widow called her over. She said the judge wanted to speak with Molly before he left town. Molly felt a flicker of worry, but nodded. She walked to the small building that served as the courthouse and jail. The judge was inside packing his papers into a leather case. He looked up when she entered and gestured to a chair. He told her the trial would be held in Santa Fe in 6 weeks. Lockhart would be transported under guard. The judge said Molly and Josiah would be called as witnesses. She asked if that meant they had to stay in New Mexico. The judge shook his head and said they just needed to return for the trial. He thanked her for her courage and said the town owed her a debt. Molly said she didn't want a debt. She just wanted to move on. The judge smiled and said that was fair. When she left the building, she felt lighter. The worst was over. Now, she just had to figure out what came next. She rode back to the cabin and found Josiah outside chopping wood one-handed. She told him to stop before he hurt himself. He grinned and set the axe down. She told him about the judge and the trial. He listened and nodded.
6 weeks. That's enough time to get strong again.
Enough time to decide what we're doing.
I already know what I'm doing.
She raised an eyebrow.
And what's that?
I'm staying with you, wherever you go.
She felt warmth spread through her chest.
I was thinking about that.
And?
The circus is gone. I can't go back to that. And I don't want to run anymore.
So what do you want?
She looked at the cabin, and then at the hills beyond.
I want a place that's ours. Not borrowed. Not rented. Ours.
Then, we'll find one.
She smiled. It felt like the first real smile she'd had in years. That afternoon, they packed their things and walked into town together. Josiah moved slowly, but he kept pace. They went to the new lending office and spoke with the blacksmith who was now running it. He showed them a map of available parcels. Most were too far out or too expensive. But there was one plot near the river just south of town. 20 acres with a small creek running through it. The price was fair. Molly had saved money from her circus days, and Josiah had his mustering out pay. Together they had enough for a down payment. The blacksmith drew up a contract, and they signed it side by side. When it was done, he shook their hands and said the land was theirs. They walked out into the sunlight and stood on the boardwalk. Molly felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Josiah turned to her and took her hand.
Let's go see it.
They walked to the stable and got her horse. Josiah climbed up behind her and wrapped his good arm around her waist. They rode south along the river road. The land opened up around them. Grassland and scrub, and the sound of water running over stones. After a mile, they found the creek and followed it west. The parcel was marked with wooden stakes. It was flat near the water and rose gently toward a line of cottonwood trees. The creek was clear and cold. Molly dismounted and walked to the water's edge. She knelt and dipped her hand in. It felt perfect. Josiah stood beside her and looked around.
We could build here, close to the trees for shade, close to the water.
It's beautiful.
He helped her to her feet, and they walked the length of the property. The sun was setting, and the sky turned orange and pink. They stopped under the cottonwoods and looked back toward town. Smoke rose from a dozen chimneys. The sound of a piano drifted faintly on the wind. Molly leaned against Josiah, and he held her close.
This is it.
This is it.
They stayed until the stars came out. Then they rode back to the cabin. The next morning, they returned to the land with tools and supplies. Josiah marked out the foundation for a small house. Molly cleared brush and stacked stones for a fire pit. They worked side by side until the sun was high. Then they sat in the shade and shared water from a canteen. Josiah's shoulder was still healing, but he didn't complain. Molly watched him and felt something shift inside her. She'd spent so many years running and hiding. Now she was building. It felt right. Over the next 2 weeks, they made progress. The foundation was laid. The walls began to rise. The blacksmith came out with his sons and helped raise the frame. The widow brought food. The general store clerk donated nails and hinges. The town had decided Molly and Josiah were worth investing in. Molly felt the weight of that trust and worked harder. Josiah's shoulder healed enough that he could use both hands. They worked from dawn until dusk. At night, they slept in the cabin and talked about what they would plant in the spring. Molly wanted a garden. Josiah wanted to raise horses. They agreed on both. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Josiah pulled the broken pocket watch from his coat. He turned it over in his hands.
I've been thinking about this.
What about it?
It stopped the moment Shaw was killed. The moment everything changed.
And?
I think we should bury it.
Molly looked at him.
Why?
Because it's over. Lockhart is in jail. The town is healing. We have our land. I don't want to carry this anymore.
She understood. The watch was a reminder of violence and fear. They didn't need it.
Then, let's bury it.
The next day, they walked to the cottonwood trees on their property and dug a hole. Josiah placed the watch inside and covered it with dirt. Molly pressed her boot down to pack the soil. They stood together in silence for a moment. Then Josiah took her hand, and they walked back to the house. The walls were up now, and the roof was nearly finished. It looked like a home. That night, they moved their things from the cabin to the new house. There were no doors yet, and no windows, but it felt like theirs. They spread blankets on the floor and lay down together. Molly rested her head on Josiah's chest and listened to his heartbeat.
I never thought I'd have this.
Neither did I.
I'm glad I do.
Me too.
She closed her eyes and felt safe. The fear was gone. The running was over. She had a home and a man who loved her and a future that was hers to build. The stars shone through the open roof, and the sound of the creek was soft in the distance. Molly fell asleep smiling. The following morning, they woke to the sound of voices. Molly sat up and saw the blacksmith and his sons approaching with a wagon full of lumber. The widow was with them carrying a basket. Josiah stood and helped Molly to her feet. They walked outside and greeted their neighbors. The blacksmith said they'd come to help finish the house. The widow said she'd brought breakfast. Molly felt tears sting her eyes, but she blinked them away. They all worked together that day. By evening, the roof was complete and the door was hung. The windows would come later, but the house was livable. When the work was done, the blacksmith shook Josiah's hand and told him he was a good man. The widow hugged Molly and said she was proud of her. Then they all left. Molly and Josiah stood in the doorway of their house and looked out at the land. The sun was setting, and the sky was painted red and gold.
We did it.
We did.
He turned to her and cupped her face in his hands.
I love you, Molly Walsh.
She felt her heart swell.
I love you too, Josiah Hawkins.
He kissed her, and she kissed him back. It was soft and gentle and full of promise. When they pulled apart, she smiled.
What now?
Now, we live.
They walked back inside and closed the door. The house was simple, but it was theirs. They built a fire in the small hearth and sat close together. Josiah told her about his plans to buy horses in the spring. Molly told him about the seeds she wanted to plant. They talked late into the night, making plans and dreaming. When the fire burned low, they lay down on the floor wrapped in blankets. Molly rested her head on Josiah's shoulder and closed her eyes. She felt safe and loved and home. The fear that had chased her for so long was gone. In its place was something better. Hope. The kind that came from knowing you weren't alone anymore. Outside, the wind moved through the cottonwoods and the creek whispered over stones. Inside the house, two people who had been lost found each other and built something new. Together, Dachi saved a wounded stranger and uncovered a murder that could destroy them both. In 1883, New Mexico Territory, a runaway circus rider finds a bleeding Union cavalry officer in a storm and pulls him into her rented cabin. When she discovers a broken pocket watch in his coat that stopped at the exact moment of a murder, they're pulled into a deadly conspiracy involving a crooked banker, forged land deeds, and a dangerous gunsmith who will kill to keep his secrets buried. As the town turns against them and the villain closes in, Molly and Josiah must risk everything to expose the truth and claim the life they both deserve. A gripping tale of courage, justice, and finding home in the Wild West. Subscribe for more thrilling Western romance stories. Wild West Romance, Western Love Story, 1880s New Mexico. Frontier Romance, Cowboy Love Story, Historical Western, Romantic Suspense, Land Fraud Conspiracy, Murder Mystery Western, Runaway Bride Western, Cavalry Officer Romance, Homestead Romance, Small Town Western, Justice and Redemption, Wild West Adventure, Period Drama Romance, Frontier Justice. Found Family Western, Slow Burn Romance, Happy Ending Western, Colorized Late 1800s American West Photograph. Natural light, gentle contrast, slightly soft focus, subtle film grain, faint dust/scratches, slight vignetting, no text, no watermark. The stunning woman in her late 20s, with long dark auburn hair in a loose braid, bright green eyes, slender athletic build, wearing burgundy riding jacket over cream blouse and dark skirt. Leans close over the handsome wounded man in his early 30s, with short dark brown hair, sharp blue eyes, strong jaw with light stubble, broad-shouldered, lean, muscular build, wearing torn Union cavalry coat and gray shirt with visible blood on his shoulder. Lying on a narrow cot inside the dim cabin, she grips his good hand tightly with both of hers, tears streaming down her cheeks, her expression fierce with protective determination and fear. He reaches up weakly with his other hand touching her face, his expression exhausted, but hopeful and trusting. Storm light filters harshly through the single window, casting dramatic shadows across the rough log walls. Foreground shows the broken pocket watch lying open on the wooden floor beside the cot, with its hands stopped. A tin basin with bloodied water and torn cloth. Midground shows the two leads in intense emotional closeness, both facing the camera at 3/4 angles. Background shows the small cabin interior are with iron stove glowing faintly, shelves with supplies, rifle leaning against the wall, rain visible through the window, and storm clouds heavy outside. Photorealistic cinematic style, shot on cinema camera, natural golden hour lighting, shallow depth of field with soft bokeh background, warm beige and amber color grading. Looks like a film still from a premium Western romance movie. Authentic 1800s period photography aesthetic, professional portrait photog. Rafi quality. Dus/through he was dressed in clean clothes, and his arm was in a proper sling. His face had color again. He smiled when he saw her.
I thought I'd take a walk.
She stopped in front of him.
You should be resting.
I've rested enough. I wanted to see the sunset.
They stood together and watched the sky turn gold and red. The air smelled like dust and sage. Somewhere a horse nickered softly. Josiah turned to her.
The judge came by this morning. He said the land is mine again. Free and clear.
That's good news.
He also said Lockhart will hang. The trial's just a formality.
Molly nodded. She felt no satisfaction in it, only relief.
There's something else.
He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded paper.
This is the deed. I want to put your name on it. Half the land is yours.
Josiah, I can't accept that.
You saved my life. You fought for this place as much as I did. You belong here.
She looked at him and saw the truth in his eyes. He meant every word.
I don't know how to run a ranch.
Neither do I. We'll learn together.
She took the paper and unfolded it. The ink was fresh. The judge had signed it that morning. There was a blank line next to Josiah's name.
Say yes, Molly.
She looked up at him. His blue eyes were steady and warm. She thought of the circus and the endless moving and the loneliness. She thought of the cabin in the mornings by the stove and the way he looked at her like she was the only thing that mattered.
Yes.
He smiled and pulled her close with his good arm. She leaned into him and felt his heartbeat against her cheek. The next morning they rode into town together. The clerk at the land office recorded the deed with both their names. The blacksmith shook Josiah's hand and congratulated them. The widow smiled and said she knew it all along. They walked to the general store and bought supplies. Coffee and flour and salt, new blankets, a proper kettle. The clerk wrapped everything carefully and tied it with string. As they loaded the packages onto the horses, the sheriff walked over. He told them Lockhart had confessed to everything. The murder, the forgery, the bribes. He would hang within the month. The bank would be sold and the money returned to the families he had cheated. Justice was slow, but it was coming. Molly thanked him. Josiah shook his hand. They rode back to the cabin in the afternoon heat. The sky was clear and endless. When they arrived, Molly started a fire in the stove while Josiah carried in the supplies. They worked together in comfortable silence. That evening they sat outside and watched the stars appear one by one. The land stretched out around them, wild and beautiful, and theirs. Josiah took her hand.
I never thought I'd have this. A home. Someone to share it with.
Neither did I.
I'm glad it's you.
She squeezed his hand and smiled.
So am I.
The night was warm and still. Somewhere a coyote called. The river whispered over the stones. They sat together until the moon rose high and silver. Then they went inside and closed the door. The cabin was small, but it was enough. The land was hard, but it was theirs. The future was uncertain, but they would face it together. And for the first time in a long time, they were home. The days that followed settled into a rhythm. Josiah's shoulder healed slowly but steadily. Molly tended the small garden behind the cabin and rode into town twice a week for supplies. They fixed the roof where it leaked and patched the cracks in the walls. The cabin became a home. One evening, as they sat outside watching the sunset, Josiah told her about his family back east, his mother and 2 sisters, how he had left after the war and never gone back, how he had drifted for years without purpose. Molly listened and then told him about the circus, the horses she had loved, the feeling of freedom when she rode, how she had run when the owner tried to force her into marriage, how she had never regretted it. They talked until the stars came out. In the morning, they woke to the sound of rain on the roof. Josiah built up the fire while Molly made coffee. They spent the day inside, mending clothes and organizing supplies. It was simple work, but it felt right. By evening, the rain had stopped. They walked down to the river and stood on the bank, watching the water run high and fast. Molly leaned against him, and he wrapped his arm around her.
I want to build something here. Not just a cabin. A life.
We already are.
I mean something bigger. A ranch, maybe. Horses. Cattle. Something that lasts.
Then we'll do it. Together.
He kissed the top of her head. She closed her eyes and breathed in the smell of the river and the prairie grass. This was home. This was enough. And it was only the beginning.